everybody. Welcome to Breadbox. I'm your host, Serious Sandy Shortbread, and I'm joined by Darcy Driver, my co-host. And we have a very, very special guest today, the Combat Wombat himself, my dad, Combat Teddy.
Hello.
Hello.
Pleasure to be here.
Pleasures all around. Fun fact for this episode is I really like The Flash. You guys should go watch Flash season 1 of the CW show. Pretty good. The rest of it you can kind of just avoid or kind of keep watching out of obligation, but yeah, it's okay.
I have the same feelings. After the first season, it was kind of just okay. My fun fact, I am 20 minutes later than I should have been to recording this because we just got our Christmas tree up. For those of you who are obviously listening to this after Christmas, it is currently December 20th. So
What I do a fun fact? Okay, fun fact. The first dice I used playing Dungeons and Dragons were stolen from a Monopoly game. That's my fun fact.
It was just D6s back then, right?
That's right. Once upon a time.
yeah, I know when I started playing, the first thing I ever DM'd was Fantasy Age. And because my parents play various dice games, we had tons of D6s. So I just borrowed some D6s that are unallocated for other games.
Right, which was one of the nice things about when I first started playing. All we used was D6s. So if you had a Yahtzee game or any kind of board game, you had access to D6s. So you had a dice pool to use when you started out.
Yeah, low barrier to entry is always nice. That's one of the things I really like about Fantasy Age presently is it's just 3d6s. And most people, regardless of where they live or what social class they are, you will have 3d6 in your house somewhere.
That's right. You probably have 2 in the junk drawer and another one floating around the house someplace else. So at the very least.
Yeah.
When we started playing, it was very easy. Because you were literally using just 3d6s to roll your stats. And when we first started, we just rolled up a character. We only played for, I think, maybe an hour the first time. Because the guy was just kind of introducing us to it. And so we were all very excited in my group. We were all pretty much high schoolers, and I think we had one college guy. And
now, was the 1 hour your actual play time, or was that including rolling characters?
That was everything. I think we probably played about 10 minutes. And there were 6 of us actual players, and then the guy that was running the DM as the DM. And I think we lasted that 10 minutes and we were all dead.
I was about to ask how many of you died.
So, yeah, I mean, it was very easy. We had no clue what we were doing. And it was basically, we were at a door. We were already down in a dungeon, he said, and we had come to this door. What were we doing? And basically, that was our introduction. So we just kind of said, well, I'm going to open the door. And that guy set off a trap, and he got killed with I think it was a poison dart that came out of the opposite wall. And killed him, and then we all decided we were going to go in all at once. So we went in the room. It was dark. We didn't have any torches, so nothing happened. We backed out of the room again, and somebody lit a torch. We went back in, and there were some orcs waiting for us who decided, they wanted to fight at that point because there was light, and combat ensued, and we were all dead. So I think there was about equal number of orcs. I think there was 5 of them, and I think we killed 1. So not a really balanced encounter, but that had us hooked. We were ready to go. So because we talked about it, I think about a week later, and just kind of describing kind of what we were thinking, what we were seeing in our minds and everything. And we all had something different we were seeing in our minds just from, things we had read and whatnot, but we all were just like, this is, kind of what we want to keep on doing, spending our Friday nights and Saturday nights, what we were doing. So, but yeah, I mean, it was very, very basic. Your character sheets were, about a 5x8 piece of paper. You just did your stats. You had a thing for what physical items you had. And then if you were like a magic user or something like that, you generally at that level, you only had, I think, one spell. And a lot of guys would pick sleep, things like that, that were more area effect. So that was just kind of, he asked you what you're doing, describe where you were. You're at an inn, you're in a city, you're out in the woods, what are you doing? He'd tell you what you would hear as you're traveling around. And, there was weather. So if you had bad weather, it took longer to get places, things like that. So, and you're just all doing this, we didn't have miniatures when we first started. So we're all just imagining this in our head. And we would each draw little maps, to kind of keep track of where we were. There wasn't one guy doing the map or, anybody drawing it for us. So it was all in your brain. And most of us had read Tolkien and some of the others that were kind of like Fritz Lieber, things like that. So we were all kind of primed for some, with some fantasy background and, ready to kind of make our own characters, things like that. And so any questions at this point, or feel like I'm talking too much, but
and Sandy, you go first.
All right. I was going to ask I know the answer to this, but if you could let the listeners know which edition you actually started in.
After Chainmail, because the guy that was running the games at the time, he had some copies of the Chainmail system. And so it was the next level, I want to say, after that. And it was it was called Dungeons and Dragons, came in a little box. And again, it was probably about an 8x10 box, maybe not even that big. And it had some dice in it, had some sheets, and it had like three different little books, and they were all black and white printed. And basically everything you needed was in there. And I think one was for the dungeon master, the other one was for the players, and I think the other one was just kind of information on how to, run the game. So actually one of them might have been monsters and things like that, and the other one was for the DM to run the game. But mostly when you're starting out, you're basically come in and you're rolling a character up every night. I had one night was probably, I don't know if it was the worst night or the funnest night, but I went through like 8 characters that night. And again, a lot of times you would just, you go in, you'd pick, I'm going to be a fighter, I'm going to be a magic user, a thief. They didn't have rogues back then, they were thieves. And you could be like a paladin or a cleric. And you pretty much only could be like the good guy. There was bad guys in it, but all the player characters were good guys. So you were lawful something, lawful good, lawful neutral, lawful chaotic. So, you got to be the hero in the story, but you would play and you'd maybe roll up 3 characters to start the night out. And then you'd play until your characters were dead, because you're pretty much going to die every time. And slowly, we probably played, I want to say probably once a week for 3 months, usually Friday nights. And you're learning things slowly, like, okay, maybe we don't want to rush down this a hallway all the time. You don't want to just walk into a room. That could be fun sometimes, but generally speaking, there was traps on doors. There was sometimes you walk in a room and there'd be a pit right on the other side of the door. So you never knew. And it was really easy to die because you only had, I think up to 6 hit points. And if you get a couple of levels up, you might gain a couple. So you were kind of going through characters. So when you had characters that were generally higher levels, you were pretty careful with them. And a lot of times we could take a whole night just like getting ready to open a door because we'd have the thief check it, for traps. Everybody pretty much carried a 10-foot pole, and you're just banging on sides of doors. You're running that along the floors. You walk along, and everybody was just like, nobody liked anybody in heavy armor because the DM that was running would always make it, like clanky.
Mm-hmm. Did he always run that you're slower?
Well, not necessarily, no, because generally the guys that had that, their max stat was their strength one, so that wasn't necessarily a problem. But they weren't encumbered unless they decided to carry a bunch of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, you're going to take a time. You're taking your time going through a dungeon, and you go down a 100-foot hall, and that could take you 3 weeks because you're just like checking for traps, and that didn't save you sometimes because you're rolling to see if you detect something, and sometimes you don't, and that spike grate from the ceiling drops on you and you're dead. So or you run into a gelatinous mass that eats you alive. So
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times too, Sandy and I were talking about this a little earlier. Just a lot of the things when you're traveling between places, random encounters tended to be more like what you might expect to run into in a forest, like a bear or a lion or tiger, something like that. And you kind of think nowadays, you kind of think about, a bear, that's, my first level fighter could probably take him pretty easily. But these bears, back then, they could kill you because
they would fight.
Yeah, well, they could do a ton more damage than you could, and you didn't have the hit points that they had. So an encounter with a bear could like decimate your party, or a lion, something like that. And it was kind of things you expected to run into. I mean, you were still fighting goblins, you're still fighting orcs, things like that in the dungeons and out and about. But generally, random encounters tend to be more, natural things like that. So, and you didn't really get into, kind of the monsters. You can kind of run into a little more nowadays, like an owlbear or something like that. But you kind of got used to dying, but you also learned, okay, this, doing these steps tends to make me live longer. So have the thief check for check the door for traps. If it's locked, if we don't detect any magic on the door or we don't detect any traps, somebody puts their ear to it and you listen. And then very quietly, you try to have somebody open or unlock the door if it's locked. And then you just kind of, we had a door order, so you would have everybody kind of in a crescent around the door, with people with swords by the door and people with, bows and crossbows back farther away. So when the door opened, everybody pretty much had some sort of shot in there. So if something came right out, then the fighters at the door could hack at it. And usually the guys with the bows and the crossbows can fire at it too. So a lot of times you saved yourself just by, being prepared for something like that.
So was original D&D more like a police breach and clear SWAT team?
In some ways, yes. Because everybody kind of had a position. If you were like a ranger or something like that, you're usually going to be using your bow, so you'd be back farther. And there was a lot more, I want to say tactics, like that sort of thing. Because a lot of times when I play with people nowadays, especially new people, they just like, if there's bad guys in the room, they run in and they just run up to them and start fighting them. Mm-hmm. And we had kind of learned that it was actually better to have a line of guys shoulder to shoulder, kind of making a wall, and fighting and making them come to you. And then
bottlenecks are your friend.
Bottlenecks are your friend. Absolutely. Yes. And because generally anytime we kind of got away from walls or, kind of out in the middle of the room. We got surrounded and killed. So you learn not to go into the middle of the room. Get surrounded.
Yeah, I mean, I see that same line of thought trying to be brought back in 5th edition when you have flanking rules, particularly because that's there to make sure, oh, your party went into a room all the way. Well, now there's like 4 things, one on each side of this person. That person's going to die.
Right.
So
you're getting flanked and you're taking more damage. And
some of that philosophy is still living in there.
Yes. Well, they're trying to impress that lesson on people. My experience is it doesn't necessarily, it's not being picked up quite as readily because people aren't dying quite as quickly and easily nowadays, in my observation opinion. You would just, you came up with systems and you'd play with guys, that you'd playing with for a while and they had learned. And so, you would just, kind of do things you needed to survive. And then, if you came into a room that had like a chest, that was, again, a big, detect magic on it. Thief goes up and checks for traps, that sort of thing. So, and then once it got opened, you still had to check for traps again because there might be traps on the inside. I once had a character, it was like my best guy. He was 8th level. It was just playing we were actually on a choir trip on a bus, and it was just kind of a throw-out game. And he was by himself. He opened the chest. He actually disarmed the trap, and he wasn't even a thief, which was kind of unusual. And he tested it. He put his finger in there, and you just slowly lower your finger into the chest, and because somebody somewhere had come up with this thing where it was like you would disintegrate flesh. And so as soon as like one person used it and it was everywhere. So it was this kind of thing you added to your steps and nothing happened. So he had taken his glove off to do that. And without thinking, he didn't say he was putting his glove back on. So we went to scoop the gold out and the gold was contact poison. Failed to save and he was dead. That was 8th level character, was a dwarf. Very sad day. Very sad. So there's a dwarf skeleton somewhere that has a very nice +3 dwarven hammer and some really nice chainmail. So if you ever find a skeleton, make sure his chainmail gets returned to his family. You can keep the hammer. So, but it was just kind of, you got used to that, and you didn't get attached to characters. You did, but even at the higher levels, I don't think. I think that might have been the highest level I had. Was 8th level. Yeah, I think I probably about a year after that, I had stopped playing, and until recently I kind of got back into it. But you just, you died a lot, and you would try to get, if you heard a rumor about some sort of weapon or some sort of armor. That was kind of the adventure, trying to chase that stuff down, looking for artifacts, which were the more powerful weapons and armor at that time, and just trying to increase the survivability of your character. And a lot of times, depending on who was running your game, they might make you. I mean, if you're going down to a dungeon back then, you were pretty much going down there and camping out because you would be down there probably for weeks in game time. So if you didn't have enough rations, if you didn't have enough torches, things like that. So pretty much a pack mule or something along that line was pretty standard, even down in a dungeon. And that could be kind of problematic because a lot of times you'd run into like a pit in the floor. And how do you get your mule across this pit? I mean, yeah, you guys might be able to figure out something to, climb across or, find something to make a bridge, but is it going to be enough for this poor dumb animal who doesn't know anything to be taken across and survive and carry all your stuff on there? Because he would have all the food, all the extra torches, all the, extra potions, things like that. So, and a lot of times you would protect your mule before you would protect your other guys in your party, because he was kind of more important. Because Well, two things. One, he's carrying food and supplies for you going in. And when you're coming out, you can only carry so much gold and treasure. He can carry like a ton of treasure. So you wanted to make sure he was still alive on your way out so you could actually, carry enough gold and treasure to last you a while as opposed to, maybe a month or a week once you got out of there. So, because people talk about, finding a chest of gold. Well, if you divide that up, yeah, everybody can pretty much carry a chest of gold, the coins, but that's going to like slow you down because it weighs stuff. I mean, it adds to your weight. And so, a smart DM will say, okay, yeah, you put that in your backpack. Okay, what are you taking out? Because you only have so much room in your backpack. And so some guys would just like leave their food and then end up starving to death later because they didn't have that food with them because they were carrying the gold. So it was interesting. So,
yeah, with my players, I try and I don't run encumbrance. What I run is the common sense rule. Like, so where are you putting that? And where are you putting that you just took out? Oh, you're leaving it? Okay, cool. You can carry that then. Or, like I had in my Icefire Peak game, the half-orc barbarian wanted to carry it's like 10 long swords, and he's got a donkey. So I'm like, sure, that's fine. You can, I guess, use your rope and tie those 10 long swords to that donkey. Go for it. Well, they had an encounter. Lightning bolt was cast, and the barbarian survived. The donkey, however, was also in line and did not. So it's like, okay, how are you going to carry those? You're not. You're just not.
Right. And again, your donkey dies. So that kind of changes the whole game if you're like 2 weeks down into a dungeon. Game time, your pack animal that's been carrying all your food and everything dies. And if the food survives, okay, who's going to carry that now? And are you going to make it back out carrying just what you guys can carry on your backs? So,
and then the other question you have to ask is, can you eat the donkey?
Can you eat the donkey? Pretty sure if it's been hit by a lightning bolt, you can eat it. But
sacrifice the meat.
So it was just, and it was just, and again, it was all in your head. So you're just kind of imagining this. And when you talk about it later with people, they were kind of imagining, just different things, a different picture. And so it was kind of fun to kind of compare notes that way about that. So, and you would, if you were one of the lucky few could actually you could draw your character out so people could actually see it, as you saw it. But generally you're just going to, say he's an elf. He's got gray hair, gray eyes. He's dressed all in black, and he's got a breastplate, and that's it. He's got a sword and a bow, and that was pretty much your character description. So you're just
one of the things that I like doing, particularly if I'm running a Theater of the Mind session for any reason, is I love going through a maze-like structure that if I were to draw it out, it would totally give away where they're supposed to go. And so it makes Theater of the Mind so much better for those particular sessions. Like I ran a maze that I called Da Vinci's Maze, and you had sets of you could go left or right. And so eventually they would have to take the right path to go where they were trying to go and form a reasonably straight line because those were all at different angles. Little did they know I had drawn this out. However, they couldn't know that I drew this out because it was Theater of the Mind session. And the combat encounters, I did use a few minis for that, but I deliberately did not give them spatial reference beyond the immediate combat. And then I said, okay, where are you going? You've got three directions at this point. There's a hallway behind you, and then there's left at a 45. There's right at a 90. Where are you going?
Yep. So, and that's exactly kind of what we were doing. And we would draw little individual maps ourselves. When you look at them, you compare them with the other guys that were doing it, there would always be some at some point we would diverge, and somebody did like a right angle, somebody did a 45, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So we were keeping track of it in our head, and so it didn't necessarily matter that the maps didn't line up, because we, in our heads, kind of knew where we were in relation to things, so where we had to go to get back to someplace if we needed to. So it was, and again, it was all kind of making up, and they were asking, okay, what are you doing? And, so you'd come up with your plan, and if you had time, you'd kind of plan out what you're going to do. Okay, so we saw this group of orcs down the hall. They're walking around down there. Looks like a big room. They're in there. What do we want to do? We want to pass these guys up. We want to go down there and kind of get closer if we can, see what. And you kind of would talk through what you wanted to do. And so in that way you could kind of, I don't know if we probably call it metagaming right now, but you could kind of talk amongst yourselves and come up with a plan, and then you would execute it, and generally get executed. But, it was just kind of, you knew things like that. If you could do it, would, save you, hopefully, from having to roll up another character. So, but
one of the things that I really like is when my players actually make those plans. Because as long as you're not in combat, you guys can talk freely about plans and options, and out of game, like why do I think this will benefit us in game and out of game, to try and convince the actual players. But it's really funny to see some of the times when they underplan things that they really should think about, and then overplan things that are really simple.
Right.
And it's really weird as a DM to try and balance the philosophy of give them enough danger to make them weary, but don't make stuff too dangerous that they take 20 hours to do something that should take 20 minutes.
And that was part of the thing too, because you go through a dungeon, and generally speaking, there was probably, if you were doing, let's just say 10 doors in a night, one, maybe two of them would have traps. But every door, we would do the same thing. And regardless of whether we, thought it was, going to be a trap or not. So it would take like half an hour before we would open a door. We'd come up to the door, we'd look at the door, we'd check the door out, we'd check it for magic, we'd do, all this fun stuff. And then finally we would open the door. And then we'd go through the, procedure. The door's open, what do we see? It's a dark room, we throw a torch in, what do we see? That sort of thing. So it was all very... So, and I think it was probably, I want to say maybe 8 months after we had started playing that we actually started using like dimes and pennies to kind of represent things on the table. We were doing fights, because fights were kind of getting a little more complicated, because I think we had about 8 or 9 people playing as characters at that time, and so we were running into bigger groups of enemies. So, but we didn't have any fancy figures or anything like that. We were just using coins, kind of represent pennies for the bad guys, dimes for the good guys. So
yeah, when I started out, I had some just random game pieces that I would use as in place of minis. And then what I had done is I had a spare window pane and a permanent marker. So took a ruler and hand drew out 1-inch grid on that whole window pane, and then I just draw my battle mats ahead of time, and then I could just slide them under that 1-inch grid.
Wow.
Now, I was curious, Mr. Combat Teddy. I can't remember correctly or not in my head if you had said before to me in the past that you had played D&D with Gary Gygax, or you had just met Gary Gygax?
I was just, I haven't played with him ever. I don't know everybody. But no, we went to a con down in LA, and he was there signing, I think what, this may have been when the first edition came out. and he was at a table like signing. And the guy that actually introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons, he got his chainmail set signed by him, so he was quite happy about that. But yeah, it was kind of interesting. The first time you go to a con and you meet other guys like yourselves that are out there playing and kind of getting their because a lot of guys would, they would make their own armor, and you see guys carrying swords around, things like that. So it was all kind of probably you wouldn't be allowed in a con nowadays. People have swords like that, but yeah, it was just kind of very, very weird, very crazy. But you'd go there and you'd be able to buy pretty much any game system that was out there at the con if you had the money. And so it was all very, you'd be able to pick up games. There'd be people playing Dungeons and Dragons in their hotel rooms. There'd be actual organized tournaments, things like that. So it was just kind of like a great, you go there. If you got there early, you could probably start playing games, the day before the con started, and then you'd play all through the con. And then if you stayed, a day or two after that, you'd still be pretty much playing games with the diehards. So,
So you'd say that's probably one of the early Gen Cons that happened?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for us, I think they'd been going on for a fair amount of time, but we used to, we would tend to go to more to Comic Cons than Gen Cons, but I think that particular one was more of a gaming con, so...
Yeah, we have one of those in Maine coming up, and I'm my wife getting going into labor early. We're supposed to go to the SnowCon up in Bangor, and that I have some people who are like, "Hey, I'm going, and I'm bringing this game, this cool mecha fighting system. I want players for." I'm like, "Ooh, yeah, I'll play that, and I'll play that, and I'll play that." And then I know enough group of people that after the official con events are done, I could easily go, depending on if my wife doesn't want to spend time with me and is still content chilling in a hotel room having fun with my daughter, I'll probably be going to a pickup D&D game afterwards with my friend who lives up there and or the friends who are attending SnowCon.
Nice.
Exactly. So... And, you could pretty much game for 72 hours straight, just about. And if everybody goes to a con, make sure you bring your lunch. Just do yourself a favor, because the lines at the eateries are going to be horrendous.
Yeah.
And it's just going to cut out of your time for looking around and playing games and doing stuff. So get up in the morning, go to the 7-Eleven, grab some food there, put it in your backpack, eat that during the day. So,
yeah, that's what I did when we did the convention that was in Auburn, and Liz, my wife and daughter, were in Maryland that weekend. And so I got there, I had brought protein bars, and people had started playing organized D&D. I'm like, cool, this is me. I'm here for this. Let's do this. And I didn't have to get up from the table besides like once to go to the bathroom, and everyone had to at that point. And I had protein bars on the ready. I didn't have to get up and go wait in line for food. It was great.
Yeah.
I remember when we were at that convention, Darcy, that I did have to go up and go to the buffet and get a finger sandwich. And I think I let the guy who played Dusty the Red-Handed, I let him play my character for me while I was up there. But my character did go down while I was gone, so... Never know what's going to happen when you get up from the table at a convention.
Yeah, nobody even wanted, when we would go, nobody even wanted to go to the bathroom because you could get up and when you come back, your seat would be gone. Somebody else would be sitting in it playing. So they didn't care as long as the action kept moving. But yeah, I mean, it was just very, I mean, it's a lot more organized, and I finally remember, and I actually kind of had transition problems when I started playing again because things had changed, let me say a fair amount. Because I had a character that used to fight with two swords, and they were both long swords, and that was no problem. And when I made another character that fought with two swords, I was told I couldn't use long swords, and I'm thinking, okay, why not? He's got like a 16 strength, but that wasn't in the system anymore. So it may not have been in the system before. It's just it was allowed because it was something I wanted to do, and nobody really said, okay, I don't have a problem with that. Go ahead. And so it was, a little different, but
you're actually hitting on one of my favorite things from 3.5. In 3.5, there's a feat called Monkey Grip, and you can use two-handed weapons as one-handed weapons.
Okay, yeah, I think
it was just insane. You'd have to take it as a feat, but the ability to just one-hand those two-handed weapons was so strong.
They have that in Celesta now too.
Nice.
No, yeah, I think that's right. And again, feats before there weren't a thing when I was playing. That's kind of new, and I kind of, in some ways, I kind of like it. I don't think it's probably used quite as much as it might be. I can see if I was running a game, I'd probably use it a little more, and kind of use that a little more than leveling up, because it seems like we level up fairly quickly in the newer editions. But it just, and a lot of it is just kind of like, again, there's, a whole player's handbook, there's a whole dungeon guide, a whole monster manual, but use your imagination. Think about what you want your character to look like. What do you want him to be able to do? And, kind of just build him in your mind, and don't be afraid to kind of say, okay, I'm going to try this. He's got a 16 dexterity, so I want to see if I can, take this dagger and throw it into the eye of the monster across the room. And don't be afraid to try stuff out, or just, be wild. And, I'm going to go, run over here, jump off this wall, bounce off that one, and I'm going to jump over the top of this guy's head, and I'm going to attack him from behind. So,
yeah. Called shots is actually one of my favorite things to do in D&D. And I usually allow most called shots. And what I do is I increase the number required to hit. And if you don't have the high enough modifiers, obviously you're going to fail. But I definitely allow and even encourage my players to do that. Like we were talking a few podcasts ago about one of my friends who's playing Half-Orc Barbarian picked up the orc boss and dropped him. And that's not usually something you see most of your players do, but again, you can run it with either higher check or opposed checks. I like running opposed checks personally, and being able to do those cool and crazy things.
Right. And sometimes your group gets together and they come up with a plan, and it's kind of wild, and whether it works or not, they usually have a good time trying to make it work. And some of the things, we had were, kind of like that. We had a night sometimes when everybody died, but we all had a good time, and we were all working together and trying to, not to die. But, sometimes that's just what happened back then. So, and you just kind of come back the next week, roll up a new character, and off you go. So
yeah, and I like that a fair amount of the interactions between certain things have been actually added into rules, like the grease spell with fire, or web spell with lighting the web on fire. And I definitely allow and support weird interactions. And I would definitely encourage any of the DMs who are listening to this, allow those weird interactions at your table. Encourage those weird interactions at your table.
Yeah. And one of the things that I have noticed between when I first started playing and nowadays is you still, when you start your character, you get like a backpack or something like that with, certain things in it. And we were in and out of our backpacks all the time. We had to get a piton to spike the door. We had to, get our rope out, or we needed some oil to, light our lamp, or we were going to run some oil under the door, and then we're going to light it on fire and see if anything happened on the other side. Do we hear screaming? Nope. Okay. That sort of thing. So nowadays it doesn't seem like people are, you get that stuff, but it just pretty much sits there and nobody really does anything with it because they've got, spells, or they got cantrips, or different things that they use instead of that. But we used to, you come in down a hallway and you've gone as far as you can, but there's a 20-foot pit, or a gap in the floor, and you have to work some way to get across that. So we would get our pitons out and hammer them in the wall, and we're tying ropes to those, and then we kind of have somebody stretch out, put another piton in, tie the rope, and then, they're kind of like, tying themselves on the rope and working their way across. And we have the whole time you're making a huge amount of noise hammering into the wall. And so you've got, half your party's like watching all directions to make sure you're not come upon by something. And so it seemed like, you kind of had to problem solve, but it was more, I don't know. I don't want to say it was more, ordinary, but you kind of had to say, okay, what are we going to do in this situation? And, once you've got your rope tied to these pitons and you've got all across, you don't have any way really without kind of reversing the process of getting your rope back. So you're out of rope, and you might need that later. So this is kind of you kind of had to keep an eye on your supplies and things you'd used a little more than I see now, because a lot of times they don't need torches because everybody has infravision, or they have like a magical light source. So, and that's just kind of, that's great, but it also kind of takes some of the tenseness out of it, because you're going down a hallway that doesn't have any light, and you're either going to light a torch, or you're just kind of walk around in the dark blind. So, but not too I don't want to say the new systems aren't fun, because they are. People are still playing them and they're having a good time. And the group that I've recently played with, you guys included in that group, we had a really good time doing the different things we were doing, and going through the different adventures that we had. So everybody came up with some very interesting and unusual characters. And you didn't have that kind of variety when I started. You were either a human or an elf or a dwarf. And sometimes you could be a half-orc. Because some guys wouldn't let you be anything other than a dwarf, a human, and an elf. And half-elves even were very unusual. So it was just kind of, that was the genre at that point. Most of it was human-based. Tolkien was kind of the one that had, elves and dwarves. And Fritz Lieber, I think it was. He had the, what was it, Grey Mouse or Fod, and they were like adventure books, and they were adventurers, and it was an all-human kind of cast. And, they'd run into wizards and things like that. And I want to say demonic creatures. Conan, that was, again, kind of pretty much all human based. You run into some weird creatures every once in a while, but you were basically, that was kind of your basis for what you were building your characters off of. People wanted to be Conan, or they wanted to be, Fod with his rapier, and or maybe it was the Grey Mouse or the other rapier. It's been a while. So it was just, you were kind of, what you read was kind of what informed your your creation of your characters and what you wanted to be. So, I think I mentioned that I had a dwarf that had gotten to 8th degree dwarf hammer, and that was very rare to have a +3 anything. If you had a +1 sword or a +1 bow or anything like that, you were like the king of the world. Because that just gave you that little bit of edge, to be able to do that much more damage. A +3 was like considered way overkill. And you'd run into guys at the cons every once in a while, and they tell you that they got them fairly, but they would have like a gauntlets of ogre strength and a belt of giant strength, and those ones at that time you could combine, and then they would have like plus something weapons, so they were doing like 7 or 8 extra points of damage every time they hit something, and that was just like that would kill quite a few things right off. So you're like killing something every time you hit, which was
that's one of the things. That's one of the things that I really miss about 3.5 is the like skill cap, and the number cap is just so insanely higher than 5e. Because in 5e, your score cap, your skill points for your dexterity and all that, you cap at 20 naturally. In 3.5, that wasn't a thing. I had a character with like 22s, 25s, and I was like level 8.
Well, yeah, 25 when I was playing was like gods. The gods had 25s. So you never, no one would ever let you get that high. I mean, conceivably you could, but a smart DM would say no. The gods are going to step in and stop you because they're jealous of their power, and the gods could actually show up if you weren't careful. Because if you said their name, there was always a chance they would actually show up. And
that's funny.
Yeah, well, we had a guy who would always. He was a barbarian, and would swear by Odin all the time. And I wasn't there when it happened, but apparently he did that, and he showed up, and it didn't end well.
Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord Odin's name in vain.
In vain, yeah. So, but apparently that was something I guess somebody used at. And again, this is hearsay that they used this at a con in a tournament, and they called I don't know, some devil there, and then ran off. And so the devil fought whoever it was they were supposed to fight, killed them, killed the party, and then left. And then this guy came back and won the tournament. Anyway, so it could work out, but you pretty much have to say, yeah, you guys are all dead because I'm just going to run away. But there was, it again, the difference between now and then. Again, it's all about the people playing and how creative they want to be with what they're doing, and if the DM is going to be letting them, kind of run with it a little bit. Some guys, will keep you very linear. You're going to go down this path and you're not going to deviate. Whereas, other guys will let you, I have this world set up. This is where you can go out and play. Where do you want to go? And, they kind of lead the game that way. And you're in a sandbox still, but you don't feel like it necessarily because you're able to move pretty much where you want to within it. So, but
Sandy, can I take this opportunity to tease our upcoming series?
Sure. Yeah,
and that's something that we're working on that I personally, I love discovery DMing. I give the players, I might think up like a couple quest prompts, but I love getting quests from my players. I ask, hey, what is it you guys want to go do? And they're like, oh, I'd love to hunt a enter things name here. And we did that with one of my other DMs, Jared. We're like, oh, we're in a swamp. We want to go kill a crocodile, a giant crocodile. And so he pulled up the stat blocks for a giant crocodile, and my friend and I went and killed a giant crocodile. Took a lot of damage in the process, but we killed a giant crocodile. And so when in future Breadbox produces our rotating DM D&D sessions. That's something that I'm really hoping that our group embraces, particularly as part of a rotating DM format, is your party comes up with your quests ideas, your party more drives the bus, and you're just there mostly to support the rules and making sure no one goes completely off the rails. But one of the things that you have to be really mindful about if you're going that format is making sure you're there with experienced players, people who are not new to the game and can like embrace going a direction and not try and derail what other people want to do or try and go somewhere you know you shouldn't go yet. So, Sandy, thoughts? Additional input?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. I'm excited. I think it's going to be good. I would like to have Combat Teddy on as a guest, or maybe even come on and DM for us for a little bit. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how all the behind the scenes production happens, but I'm excited. So
Well, I'm willing if you'd like.
And that one's going to be Theater of the Mind anyway, so it'll be the format you're most familiar running.
Roots.
I assume.
Yeah. So, any other questions or?
Well, a question I have the audience is, wouldn't it be a good time for you to subscribe right now? Leave us 5-star review on Spotify. It would make my day.
Me too.
They have a
Okay.
They have a like and subscribe button on the podcast.
They do.
Okay.
It's really weird what platforms have what, because there's like zero consistency as far as whether they do like a star rating system or a thumbs up system or like favorite button.
Or if you're if you follow them, or if you're subscribed, whatever it is, we see you. We appreciate you. We thank you for those that already have. Looking at the analytics like I have, there's at least 50% of you who are listening right now that are not. So if you could, it would really help us out. Well, thank you for joining us, Mr. Combat Teddy. It has been a pleasure talking to you. I hope we can have you on again.
Yes, me too. Like that.
Catch you all in the next one.